thank you so much for being here. You're a hero in the veterans advocacy world, and it's really an honor to get to speak with you. Um, I really wanted to start with your time in the military and how that influenced your subsequent public service.
Well, I think everyone who has had the experience of being in the military, and especially in war, carries that experience with them all their lives. And they use that experience, they apply that experience to everything they do in their lives, in their daily lives, their personal lives, as well as their professional lives. So my military experience and my time in Vietnam has been very important in my thinking, my development of attitudes and positions. And I think especially when it comes to people, to individuals, and respecting each individual's thinking and thoughts and who they are. Because when you're in the military, everybody is equal. And it doesn't make any difference if you're black or white, Hispanic, doesn't make any difference what your religion is, what your background is, how wealthy you are, what your education is, you're equal. And I think that's a pretty good way to go through life, appreciating and respecting everybody, and understanding that that's a fundamental in life. And so I'm not sure I would have the same approach to life if I had never had that military experience. I hope I would have, but that experience brings it in sharper focus than I think if you would not otherwise had that experience.
And you mentioned Vietnam. You're the only Secretary of Defense that actually served in Vietnam. Did that particular experience shape your tenure as the Secretary of Defense?
Yes. I was there in 1968. My brother and I served side by side in 1968, both wounded twice together and so on. That was the year of Tet. We sent home that year, 1968, over 16,000 dead Americans. I mean, that's almost unfathomable today. The United States public would never put up with that. But yet we sent 16,000 dead Americans home from that war in 1 year. And every decision I made as Secretary of Defense, every question I would ask, and somehow in the back of my mind, in my thinking, was always that experience. The same way in the United States Senate, when I served on the intelligence committees and the foreign relations committees and others committees that had implications to the national security, and sending young men and women off to war and recognizing their service to our country. That war experience, yes, it affected me. And it was a constant reminder, regardless of the decision I made as Secretary of Defense, about the value of our young men and women, the value of human life, the importance of fully appreciating, understanding what you're getting these men and women into when you commit them to a hostile area or to a hostile zone. And you want to make sure you understand it as best you can understand it. And you want to make sure that it's worth it, that it is in the interest, clear interest, short-term, long-term interest of our country, and there's no other way to resolve it. I mean, it's all those kinds of things come back into your mind because of the great suffering I saw, the great tragedies I saw, the great unfairness I saw on both sides. It wasn't just Americans. It was the South Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese, the innocent civilians, the killing, the suffering. It was terrible. So yes, that stays with you, and that affects every decision that you make. Certainly affected every decision I made as Secretary of Defense.
And I assume that probably was part of one memo that you drafted. I'm sure as Secretary of Defense, you drafted many, but in discharge upgrade land, there's a memo called the Hegel Memo, as if that's the only one that you ever wrote. And it was an absolute watershed moment for veterans with PTSD getting their service recognized and opening up benefits for them. And thank you for that, because it has absolutely changed thousands of veterans' lives, many of them Vietnam veterans. And I just wanted to know, how did that come to be, and what are your thoughts of the lasting impact that that's had?
Well, your senior senator from Connecticut, Senator Richard Blumenthal, had a lot to do with that. He came to me one day. He served, and he still serves on the Armed Services Committee, and told me about his thinking on this, and how unfair this was, that these records were not being reviewed, and it was a tragedy. And I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to then go back a little bit and give you a little of my own history on this subject to answer your question, and I'll come forward and then bring it up to the time that I wrote that memo in 2014. I served as Ronald Reagan's first deputy administrator of the Veterans Administration in 1981. After he was elected in 1980, and it was before the Veterans Administration was a cabinet position. So the deputy administrator was like the deputy secretary. I personally took on the Agent Orange issues, and what I saw at the time, some of the many ways of how our Vietnam veterans were being mistreated, not just people on the streets when they came back and mistreating them, but our own government, our own Veterans Administration. And that gave me, as the number 2 person at the Veterans Administration, a real insight as to what was going on and what the inequities were and how unfair it was to so many of these veterans. And that's where I really first started to get a clear understanding of these issues. After I left the administration, I resigned as the deputy administrator. I resigned because the administrator and the White House at the time were trying to stop all further Agent Orange studies, epidemiological studies, all studies that had been funded in the Carter administration by Max Cleland, who was the Veterans Administration administrator at the time. And I thought that was wrong. And I went to the White House, and I went to Jim Baker, went to the president, and said, I can't stay here unless you change course on this. And the administrator and I disagreed on it. And so I resigned. I then about a year later, at the request of Judge Weinstein, Jack Weinstein in New York, took over an interesting assignment. It was part-time. It was not paid. It was a volunteer assignment. In about 1982, 83, that time period, the largest out-of-court settlement of any company industry in the United States had just occurred. And it was a out-of-court settlement of the 7 manufacturers of Agent Orange. And that produced an out-of-court settlement of $200 million, maybe it was a little more than $200 million, being put in a separate fund for Vietnam veterans. Well, that was fine, that was good, positive, but then the problem became, when you ask the question, what are we going to do with $200 million? Who gets the benefit of that? So Judge Weinstein asked me if I would assume a position of putting together an advisory board, which I did, made up of myself and 4 other Vietnam veterans, and advise the court and the special master in the court, Ken Feinberg, what we should do with that Agent Orange money. And that went on for 10 years. That also experience gave me a real understanding of so much of the inequities of what Vietnam veterans were having to do. Their records were all part of this. So when in the Senate, I got involved in it with Jim Webb. In fact, it was Jim Webb and I who got the new GI Bill passed in 2008 that replaced the Montgomery Bill, which really changed everything. And it was Webb and me who did that, Jim being a distinguished Vietnam veteran. And so all along my career path, I've found experiences that have enlightened me more and more to the inequalities, inequities that have to be dealt with. So when I got to the Pentagon, I started looking at it and asked the people there to look at it. And I think I testified a couple of times before the Senate Armed Services Committee. But when Senator Blumenthal came to me and said, here's what we'd really like you to look at, if you would take an initiative if you think is the right thing to do. And I got into it. I got very deeply into it, got the Pentagon into it. And that's what led up to that memo that I wrote in 2014. And it was the right thing to do.
It certainly has had a huge impact. Just thousands and thousands of veterans. And we personally have at CVLC been able to help a few of those individuals, and it's so transformative. So thank you again for that. Nobody was winning those cases before the Hegel Memo. What's your proudest achievement, do you think?
Well, I don't know if I would single one thing out. I mean, I'm proud of what we did accomplish in all the areas of responsibility that the Secretary of Defense has, and areas that maybe have been forgotten over the years that should have been given more attention, that we tried to pay attention to that. I mean, we restructured entirely the POW MIA offices and much more accountability. But I think if there's one thing it was that I'm proud of is the men and women that I worked with, to give them a sense of how important they are, and they know this, but outside of their sphere of influence, just in the military, they are really role models. And I tried to emphasize that every day with them as I would meet everywhere I would go around the world. I would always have time to spend a couple hours with our lowest enlisted, have lunch with the lowest enlisted, listen to everybody, bring everybody in. And I do it at the Pentagon, monthly luncheons with senior enlisted, with the chiefs, obviously. I started a system where we had quarterly meetings with all the veterans groups. It had never been done before. All the veterans groups represented in Washington came in for a 2-day briefing on what the military was doing, where were we overseas, everything we were doing in big ways. And then I spent about 2 hours with them, with the leaders. Usually there'd be about 60 or 65. They had lunch there. I spent time with them and letting them ask any question they wanted to ask me. And I think that was very effective to bring veterans back into the active duty process. They had never been invited to do that, but give them a chance to be better veterans advocates, be better veterans leaders, because they had more knowledge. They knew what was going on. And I got a lot of good advice from these people. But in the bigger sense, just reminding our military men and women that they're role models for this country, in the world, quite frankly. Yes, they've got a mission. It's very clear. It's very absolute, but it's bigger than that. And when they get out and how important they are in communities, our veterans are so important in communities, whether you run for public office or you get involved, like you're getting involved, that you've been involved, what you're doing. So many ways veterans contribute to communities. And, and don't underestimate your value as a veteran. People look to you, they admire you, and you are a leader. You're a leader just like you're a leader inside at the active duties that we all serve in. You're a leader just like that on the outside. So that's a little nebulous, maybe a little general, but that's what I think that I'm most proud of. We did a lot of new things that had never been done before to try to emphasize the quality and the importance and the leadership of each of our military men and women and their families when they get out.
That actually goes to the next question that I wanted to ask you, which is just from your vast experience, decades of public service, do you have any best practices, tips for veterans, people working in veterans advocacy? What can we do what can we do better? What can we do to really push change?
Well, I think veterans advocacy groups do a tremendous job, and you all get better every year. I'm very impressed. You get more and more quality people involved, and I think continue to do that. Continue to reach out to the communities. I know some of the people who are involved in our conversation here, who are listening to it, are people who do that on behalf of veterans, lawyers, others who volunteer their time to help veterans and straighten records out or whatever they do. And I think veterans groups just continue to reach more and more people, continue to focus on that. And it doesn't mean a veteran is a better person than anybody else at all. And but a veteran has accomplished something and has contributed something to this country, and that's pretty meaningful. And I think just to state that case expands the market, expands for help and involvement. So that's the one thing I would say, continue to do that and focus on that, because that's the way you become more effective and you bring more people in and you make more people aware in the veterans community who need the help, but sometimes they don't understand, they don't know it's there, or even ashamed to come, that they're not strong enough to ask for help. That's exactly the wrong attitude. And we need to take, if there's any question about shaming people about coming forward for help, whether it's a drug problem or whatever it is, we need to take that stigma away. So it's the entire environment that you all not only work in, but you produce. You produce a certain positive environment that reaches out into the community and are able to recruit so many great people like are on this call and watching this, what we're doing here today, giving them the incentive to step forward and to help.
Well, thank you so much for that. And we try to get out into the community as much as possible, but I don't think that there's ever too much reaching out to veterans and going out into the community and seeing where the need is. Is there anything else that you have to say to people watching? Any other words of wisdom?
Well, I don't know how much wisdom I've imparted, but I certainly have given you a lot of words. That's a bad habit I picked up in the Senate. You never get out of that, but a lot of words. But I would just say, again, it kind of summarizes maybe what I've tried to say, is that leadership is reflected in many ways. And every one of us has some capability to be a leader. And I think the more we can emphasize that with our people, with our veterans, and that extends beyond just a veterans community. That extends to an entire community of people, of a nation, the value of an individual, the value of a man and a woman, no matter what your station in life is. And I think as others view and reflect upon what veterans do and what they have done and what they continue to do in a community, that inspires everybody. That it really does. And I think if there's one thing in my career that I've like to think that I helped along the way is young people that have worked with me and for me in decades and decades of different jobs I've had. Maybe inspire them a little bit to go on and do things that they never thought they could do. I mean, I'm a very good example. I come from a family in the Sand Hills of Nebraska. I lived in 9 different little towns all over Nebraska before I graduated from high school. My father was a veteran of World War II. He was in the South Pacific for almost 2.5 years. Came back in late 1945. My parents were married on Valentine's Day, 1946. 9 months later, there I am. I'm the oldest of 4 brothers. And so my background wasn't anything special. I went to 4 colleges before I ever got out of one. So my educational background was not one to be emulated. If somebody told me when I was growing up or when I was in Vietnam, went over as a private and came back as a sergeant, that someday I'd be a United States Senator, someday I'd be Secretary of Defense, someday I'd be co-chairman of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, and so on and so on and so on, president of the World USO. I mean, I could not have understood that. It just wouldn't have registered with me. And so I think we all need to take the responsibility to inspire everybody. And I was inspired along the way by many people, many mentors, many people who helped me. And I think that's our biggest responsibility in life. And veterans really have a leg up on that, I think, because they understand it and they can do something with that experience. So happy Veterans Day to all of you. And thank you all very, very much for what you do. And I'm grateful for an opportunity to share some thoughts with all of you.
Thank you so much.